I'm Dave Palumbo, founder of Species Nutrition. I created Species Nutrition with one mission in mind: to provide bodybuilders and serious athletes with no-nonsense supplements that work and are backed by science. From my earliest bodybuilding days, I believed in only putting the best in my body, and that lives on in the Species Nutrition line of products. We use only top-of-the-line formulations dosed for maximum results and the best flavoring systems available. I put my name and reputation on every bottle of Species Nutrition products. If you want to be your absolute best, join the evolution. Welcome back to Live With, brought to you by Species Nutrition. I'm Dave Palumbo, and today is a really cool interview. I'm here with a guy who's been competing for over 40 years in the industry. He's trained pretty much all over California. He's written books that we're going to get into because this is some cutting edge stuff. He's one of the most knowledgeable guys that I know in the bodybuilding industry, and I'm really happy to finally join him and then talk shop. Doug Brignole, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave, very much. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to you because you know what? A lot of people are always telling me, and I mean, Bill Comstock's been trying to hook us up for years, and he's always saying, you and Doug, you both talk the same language, and right. Finally, I just, we kind of connected. I said, I got to get you on the show, so we got you here today. But I wanted to, before we talk shop and science and all that stuff, at 59 years old, you competed and you won the AAU. What was it? The AAU Universe for Masters and overall.
Yeah, I'm 60 now. This was last November.
Holy mackerel!
I don't know if you know, the AAU took a hiatus. They weren't doing any bodybuilding shows.
Oh, they were. I didn't even know that. Yeah.
Between 1990, I think it was, and 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And then Martin Drake, who's been in the powerlifting world for decades, brought back AAU bodybuilding. So it's still kind of on the rise. It's not kind of where it was.
Right, I understand that. But you're 60 years old, almost 60 years old, and you competed and you won the thing. I mean, that's impressive. Right. And I'll tell you why it's impressive, because I know how my body feels right now, and I feel good. But I'm not in the gym pushing maximum weights and trying to get to that point where I want to compete. So how does your body, or how has your body held up so well after all these years of killing it, in the gym?
Well, frankly, I don't mean to cut to the chase, but this is what my book is about. Mm-hmm. It's that I discovered through the years that conventional weight training, traditional exercises, are very inefficient for the body. They're by efficient, we mean load versus amount of weight used, right? So, for example, a muscle doesn't know that it's getting, let's say, 90% of the weight you're using versus 30% of the weight you're using, but physics determines that, right? So,
right.
If your muscle has the strength capacity of 90 pounds of resistance, let's say, you don't choose the weight randomly. You choose it on base what you can handle.
Right.
So if that's the capacity of that muscle, you're choosing a weight that loads it to capacity. It could be 300 pounds and 30%, 90 pounds. It could be 100 pounds and 90%, 90 pounds, right? So, but 300 pounds damages the joints, damages the skeleton, damages the spine. And feels like shit, frankly. It feels, especially, it feels so bad when you were 30 years old.
Right.
But when you're 50 years old, it feels a lot heavier than it used to feel.
Yeah.
So basically, I just figured out, what the most efficient exercises were, and was able to get, because people say, do you train heavy? I go, well, if you define heavy by a weight that limits you to 4 to 6 reps, then yes, I train heavy. Well, if you train heavy by a number of pounds. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you what those exercises are in a minute, but I'll tell you what I realized. When I was toward the end of my career, or competitive career, I should say, I had really bad shoulders. I knew I needed shoulder replacements. I put them off from when the doctor first told me that. I probably waited 20 years before I actually got them, which is what the doctor recommended. He's like, don't get them until you absolutely need them. So I started modifying my training when I realized that I had issues there, to do only exercises that, didn't put my body into a position where I had to stabilize too much. I already had all the mass I needed, and I found movements that didn't hurt, that I isolated, but that I overloaded. I used heavy weights that I could handle, and for some reason I held on to a lot of my muscle over the years. So I don't know if I kind of did what you did in not knowing what I was doing, but so having said that, I'd like to hear what you think are the most efficient exercises that will elicit the best response from the body, but yet not damage it.
Well, look, I mean, what all of us bodybuilders should do is we should say, you know, what does each muscle do? I mean, it's such a logical question, right? For example, what does the side deltoid do?
Right.
Well, all muscles, right, when they contract, they pull the insertion toward the origin.
Right.
Right. So the question is, how can you do that? How can you cause that contraction to happen with the least joint distortion?
Right.
Right. Well, an overhead press will screw up your shoulders and does not simplify the fact that the side deltoid insertion has to move toward the origin, which would be a lateral movement. So an overhead press is only a shoulder exercise in that it simulates a side lateral. That is what that side deltoid is designed to do. Right. So why complicate it? Why shorten the lever, which requires more load, right? Because you have less magnification. Why shorten the lever? Why externally rotate the shoulder joint so far that it's actually almost in an arm lock position? Right. Why do that if it doesn't actually improve the mechanics of the insertion moving toward the origin? Right. So the next question would be okay, so if you're saying that a side lateral is every bit as good as an overhead press, why doesn't it feel that way? Right. Well, it doesn't feel that way because you've got the resistance curve wrong when you're doing a standing side dumbbell raise. It's too easy at the bottom and too heavy at the top. Right. Because your lever is vertical and neutral at the beginning and horizontal and heavy at the top. Well, that's the opposite of the strength curve of all muscles. True. It needs to be heavier at the beginning and lighter at the end. So if you get on a side, on the floor horizontally and you do that same movement, all of a sudden now you have that same feeling of pushing that you do with an overhead press, not of swinging it. So you talking about laying on your side? What are you talking about? Yeah, that's one way of doing it, or a very slight incline angle where your head is a little bit higher than your hips. Okay. And you do a side raise using a resistance curve that matches the strength curve of the muscle. Heavier when the muscle is stronger, lighter when the muscle is weaker. Right. And you're still doing what that muscle does, which is bringing the insertion toward the origin. You can do it with cables by setting the pulley up, at hip height. What I did was, what I somehow figured out was that if I sat on a side lateral machine and I rested the pad on my elbow, and I just lifted one arm at a time unilaterally, that for some reason the stability was there, that I didn't feel pain in my shoulder. Every other movement, shoulder press overhead, I couldn't do it. Grinding, popping. I got on that side lateral machine one arm at a time, and I can do the whole stack with excellent, perfect form. And you know what? I didn't lose an ounce of muscle for 10 years on my shoulders. And that's logical. That's logical because you can load your deltoid every bit as much as you can with an overhead press by doing the side lateral raise machine. Now, you said an interesting thing. You said unilateral. Yes. Right? Why is that better? There's a reason why it's better. I want to know. And it's something that I talk about in my book. Well, there's actually two reasons. One is something called bilateral deficit, which is that, as the name implies, bilateral deficit, less than, right? Yeah. When you do two arms at the same time, each arm is a little less strong than it would be by itself. Interesting. They've done studies on this, and they've shown this is actually true. If you're doing, is that because of the nervous system activation? Right. Okay. And there could also be like an attention thing, but if you're doing a 2 dumbbell curl with a pair of 30-pound dumbbells, it'll be much harder than if you do 30 pounds, 30 pounds, right? 30 pounds, 30 pounds, right? And part of it has to do with the posture, right? So if you're doing one arm, you actually lean toward that arm, right? And so your geometry changes a little bit when you. Same thing with. And even more so when you're doing laterals, shoulder, side deltoid, and lats. And that's because we have this thing that I call unilateral focus. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that if you do curls, both arms are pulling in the same direction. Right. If you're doing triceps, both. But if you're doing side raise, this going to the left and this going to the right. Those are opposite directions. Interesting. That would be like you're trying to do a push down with one hand and a curl with the other. Yeah. Your brain can't quite focus on both, and your posture changes.
Intuitively,
Right?
intuitively, I just knew that I wasn't getting
Right.
maximum stimulation doing both at the same time. I don't know why, but I just knew it. I could.
Yeah,
If you
well,
have a
see,
good
you're
feel for your
intuitive.
body and you can actually have good mind-muscle connection, you know when something's not working properly. You know.
And that's how I arrived at all this,
Yeah.
is that I would always do what you do, which is I could feel what I was feeling and where I was feeling it, and then I would say why.
Right.
And then I would research it, and I would find bilateral deficit, and I would find unilateral focus, and I would find these things. Oh, there's a trigger. Okay, for example, here's one. Why is squats, let's just say you were to squat without any weight on your back, you squat down, squat up. Why is that in some ways harder than a sissy squat?
Yeah, I always wondered that. Yeah, why is it?
Right? It's because of this thing called reciprocal innervation. Again, a central nervous system interference. When you activate the glutes, and at the same time you activate the quads, a couple of these things are canceling each other out because the body will not allow you to contract opposing muscles simultaneously.
Interesting.
You cannot fire your bicep and your tricep at the same time, and no one even thinks about that because no one tries to do that, right? But when you activate hip extension muscles, which are your glutes, and you're loading them by way of squats, you're shutting off your hip flexor muscles, which is the opposite joint function. One of the hip flexors is the rectus femoris, 25% of your quadricep.
Yeah.
Shutting off, right? When you're activating the quadriceps, what's shutting off? The hamstring. What does hamstring do? Participates in hip extension.
Right.
So you're having this neurological conflict going on that's making the squatting thing harder than it would be if you just did knee extension separately and hip extension separately.
But why does it work so well, squats?
No one says it does. I mean, all we know is that Tom Platz had big legs and he squatted.
Well, we know that I have never seen anyone's legs look better than when they squat. For some reason, when people stop squatting, I see weird, different, they don't have the same shape to their legs for some reason.
Well, okay, so the first thing I would say is when they stop squatting, what do they do instead? Right? That's what matters. Okay, so look, there's no doubt that activating your quadricep when all four heads are working is better than when only three heads are working. Right? There's no doubt about that. And you can mathematically calculate. That's why my book is called The Physics of Fitness. You can mathematically calculate how much load is going on. So all levers have a muscle that move it, right? So the lower leg is the muscle that is operated by the quadricep. Right? So if you know just the most basic physics, which is like the pendulum that hangs vertically is neutral, right? If you move that pendulum over to the side, it wants to go back to the neutral position. When it's horizontal, when it's perpendicular to gravity, that's when that lever will be heaviest.
Right.
0 when it's parallel to gravity, 100% when it's perpendicular to gravity, and percentages thereof in between. So when you squat, your lower leg, which is being operated by the quadricep, only dips forward about 30 degrees, far from horizontal, not even at 45-degree angle, not even at a 50% active angle, right? So that means that whatever you have on your back isn't loading your quads as much, and so you put more weight on the bar, you compress your spine more to compensate for the 30% angle of your lower leg, instead of just letting that lower leg go lower as it would in a sissy squat.
Interesting.
Okay, so here's the math, okay? If you are a 200-pound guy and you have 200 pounds on your back, that's 400 pounds divided by 2 legs is 200 pounds. Multiply times the length of your lower leg lever, which is about 20. Multiply times the 30% equals about 940 pounds of load per quadricep. Never mind that the rectus femoris is being shut off, right? 940 pounds of load per quadricep. But if a 200-pound man without any weight on his back does a sissy squats and lets his lower leg get near horizontal.
Explain sissy squat to people who may not know what a sissy squat is.
Okay, a sissy squat, let me demonstrate it here. Good question there. Sissy squat is where instead of leaning forward as you squat, you lean back. It's like you're doing a limbo. Remember when you do the limbo and you get underneath the bar? So what you're doing when you do that is you load only the quadriceps. You don't load the glutes or the lower back at all. Well, no. I'm just talking about a regular sissy squat in space where you're either just balancing yourself or You can hold on to dipping bars or a Smith machine bar or something like that, just very lightly, not assisting yourself any more than you have to, right? If you lower your lower leg to the point where it's almost horizontal, that same 200-pound guy without any weight on his back will load his quadriceps with 1,200 pounds. That's a fact. That's engineering. That's architecture. That's what any mechanical engineer, structural engineer will tell you. The exact people who design cranes know these numbers. This is the math. That's a fact, right? And the problem is that we are such muscle heads that we are convinced that having a weight on our back where the plates are rattling and looks more impressive to observers automatically loads the quadriceps more than that sissy squat that doesn't seem to be doing anything. But from an engineering standpoint, that's completely false.
Show me one more time the sissy squat you think people should be doing, that they can get the same benefit from doing no weight, just body weight sissy squat as what you said, putting all that weight on your back.
I'm going to move this back just a little bit.
Yeah, that's okay. I think this is important enough to show people.
You're not seeing my legs, though.
I see what's going on. I can see what's going on.
I don't know how to describe it.
You're throwing your knees forward, so yeah, I understand what you're doing.
Yeah, let me do it this way.
Okay. Doug's a technical perfectionist is right, Tyler. Wow. And that's very hard to do if people haven't tried to do it. It's not easy. If Ronnie Coleman did that movement, he'd probably put 405 on his back, right, while he was doing it?
I'm sorry, say again?
I said if Ronnie Coleman did that back in the day, he'd probably be able to do 405 with that weight, with that form.
Look, you know who else did it is Tom Platz.
Oh, he was a sissy squat guy too, yeah.
Rich Gaspari. I mean, Lee Labrada. I mean, and the thing is that people would do sissy squats and barbell squats and leg presses.
Yeah.
and the fact of the matter is that's redundant.
Yeah.
Right. Then the quadricep does one thing primarily, other than the rectus femoris, which assists in hip flexion. It does one thing. It extends the knee. So the idea that you're going to do knee extension, different kinds of knee extension, some which involve the hip flexion, hip extension, and some which don't, that is redundant. The idea is that all exercises can be mathematically, not only mathematically, but also from the standpoint of how ideal the anatomical motion is for that muscle and for that joint, right? They can be rated on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say 10 being the best. And then you would say, well, then why would I do an exercise that's a 7 on that scale?
Right.
Why would I do a 6? Why would I do a 5 when I can just do more of the 10? Right. And then let that muscle get the most. It's like having, several doses of vitamin C.
Right.
And then taking some that are 500 milligrams, some that are 200 milligrams, some that, why not just take the 500?
So how many sets would you do of sissy squats when you do your leg workout? And would you put weight in addition to your body weight?
Well, first of all, let me say there are several ways of doing sissy squats. That's one way. The other is using the bench that you described, where you hook your ankles on behind this thing, and so that's another way of doing it. Frankly, I think the best way of doing a sissy squats is either with inside a squat rack with a couple of heavy elastic bands above you, so you can actually use these elastic bands to help you get out of the bottom. Because the problem with a sissy squat is it's body weight or nothing, right? You can't just move the pin, right? So you can add more weight, but then that creates imbalance.
Right.
You can subtract weight by way of these elastic bands, right? And these elastic bands or ropes also help you balance so that you don't lose your coordination and fall to one side. The best way of doing a sissy squat is with a dual pulley machine or a single pulley machine, where you've got a slight forward pull on the cable and you kind of lean back like you're water skiing, and you do a sissy squat with that. And I'll tell you why. It's really interesting. When you stand straight, you are balanced over your heels, right? If you did not have a forward pulling resistance from the cable and you lean back, you would fall back.
Sure.
Right. So when you put a certain amount of weight on that weight stack and you lean back, your body weight is offsetting the weight that's on the pulley.
Interesting.
So you can actually do a sissy squat with less than your body weight.
Right.
By putting a light weight on the weight stack and leaning back a little bit. And this minus that equals less than your body weight. And you can also, you move the pin and add weight.
Yeah.
Us, it's balancing you and coordinating you.
Right. When I would squat back in the day, sometimes as heavy as 600 and something pounds, for reps. We would end sometimes the workout with sissy squats with body weight, and it felt like 1,000,000 pounds. You're right. It was like unbelievable the load.
Yeah, people don't understand the physics, the magnification due to the physics of that exercise. They think it's a sissy exercise, and it's foolishly called that, right? In my book, I forgot what the name of there was an emperor or something called that, and it's believed that it was named after him.
Oh.
But the point is that the physics of the sissy squat is such that it creates much more magnification to the quadricep and gives you far more load on the muscle with much less strain on the skeleton. And to answer your question, the number of sets. Yeah. The number of sets, obviously, as you well know, depends an awful lot on how much weight you select, the intensity of each set.
Yeah.
Right? You can do endless sets if you're not using much intensity, right? But if you're using a fair amount of intensity, most of us can handle somewhere between 8 and 14 sets per muscle.
Total.
If you do,
that's including your leg extensions and curls and stuff like that, right?
A total per muscle.
Yeah.
So you can do half of them on sissy squats and half them on leg extension if you want.
Right.
They're very, very similar.
Sure.
Or you could use one. Now that I'm working out in a garage and we don't have a leg extension machine, we just do the sissy squats, and we blow our legs out. Quads and hamstrings with cables.
Are sissy squats? I get this question a lot. Are sissy squats bad for your knees?
They are not.
Okay.
They are not. Nor is leg extensions bad for your knees, and that's what we hear a lot.
Yeah.
Let me grab a prop real quick.
I love props. Can't go wrong with props. That's for sure. All right, let's see what he's got here.
So, let me tell you how ridiculously lacking in logic the idea that a sissy squat would shear the knee. You've heard this, right?
Shear forcing.
Oh, don't do leg extension. They shear the knee. Okay.
Right.
So I created this little model right here, which is basically an upper leg and a lower leg.
Right.
Right. And shearing would be this. Shearing is the idea that you're moving the lower leg, the upper part of the lower leg, away from the joint.
Yeah.
Right. So the first thing I did is I created this model. This would represent the patella tendon.
Yes.
Coming from the quadricep, right?
Or on the knee,
so,
yeah.
Sometimes the criticism is focused on the fact that the resistance is being applied to the distal end of the lower leg, meaning at the ankle, right? As if that's worse. That's actually better, because the lower it is, the longer the lower leg, the more magnified it is, and the less weight you can actually use.
Right.
Right. So if I push low on this thing here, as I will here, you can see that it just swivels.
Sure.
Right. If I push high, I can shift it away. But if I was trying to, let's say, shear your knee, and you were sitting in a chair, I would actually have to put my hand just below your knee and another one behind your ankle.
Right.
And I would have to actually push in opposite direction, and actually, because the tendons and ligaments in there are pretty sturdy.
Yeah.
Right. If I don't put anything behind your ankle and I push on your upper, just behind, nothing's going to happen.
Right.
Right now, if I hit it with a hammer, maybe, right?
Sure.
But it's not going to happen with resistance. So the real crux of it is that if you put 50 pounds of load right here, this is about a 20-fold lever, a 20-to-1 ratio. Okay. Right. That means in order to extend, for the quadricep to extend 50 pounds at the ankle, it has to produce 20 times more force.
Wow.
That's 1,000 pounds of quadricep force, right? That quadricep force coming up and over the knee, which is pulling the tibia up.
Sure.
With 1,000 pounds of force, while only 50 pounds is pulling it in. So that's anchoring force. There's just no way mathematically that upper leg can move away from the knee joint when it's got 20 times more anchoring force than it does vertical force.
Look, it's basic science and physics, like you said. You're not making this stuff up, obviously. So
and here's another thing. They'll say, "Oh, don't let the knees go over the toes when you're squatting." Oh, don't let. Well, what they're indirectly saying is, don't let that lower leg break from the vertical position.
Right.
Well, guess what? As we just said, vertical means neutral.
Sure.
So they're indirectly saying, don't load your quadriceps at all, because despite you having no knee problems, it's bad for the knees. No, perpendicularness is necessary in resistance exercise.
It's amazing how these experts out there give out this advice and it's not even actually accurately correct. What do you think a lot of these suggestions came from originally? Is it just they just made them up? I mean, obviously, doesn't look like it has a scientific base, you know.
And they'll use analogies that aren't even logical. The one, I'm sorry, I don't mean to break from your question, but if you look at a skull crusher, the weight is in your hand. That's no different than it being at your wrist,
right?
Which would be the equivalent of your ankle, right? The same thing. Without the leg extension is basically the same thing as a tricep extension.
Right.
The leg is like an arm, right? Two bones connected by a hinge joint.
Sure.
Right. The hamstring is like the bicep. The quadricep is like the tricep, right? No one ever says that skull crushers will shear your elbow.
Right. True.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense, So what I do in my book is I encourage people to ask the right questions. That's what it boils down to, is like how is this any different than that?
Right. What about bench pressing? We always hear bench pressing is so terrible for you, flat bench pressing. Do you agree with that or disagree with it? And what's your take on that?
The first obvious thing that's wrong with the bench press is the range of motion, right? You know that you can't bring your hands together like you would with dumbbells. Right. So you're missing 25, 30% of the range of motion. Right. And if that's okay, then it should also be okay across the board. It should be okay for your leg extension to stop 30% short of a your biceps, your triceps, everything to stop 30% short. No, it's not okay. That's flaw number one.
Yeah.
Flaw number two is that when I always encourage people to imagine that muscles are like ropes, and then muscle origins are like a person holding that rope, pulling that limb toward it.
Yeah.
Muscles always pull toward their origin. So imagine you've got a man standing on your chest holding a rope, i.e. a muscle fiber, and that rope is going all the way across. It's going to pull that bone toward it.
Gotcha.
Right? Which, by the way, is why incline presses are not good, because the highest part on your sternum pulls the bone in a flat bench direction.
Okay.
If I go in an inclined direction, I'm assuming that I have pectoral fibers on my chin.
Interesting. Yeah.
There are no pectoral fibers above the shoulder joint.
Right. But why? Right? But how come incline presses definitely seem to improve that upper part of your pecs? I mean, we've seen. I've seen it. Happen.
Well, that's an illusion. Okay. What that is because I can tell you for a fact, and I don't even know what your training program is. I can tell you for a fact, you never spent 6 months doing only incline presses.
At one part of my career, I kind of did only incline work. I'll tell you why, because I felt like I always feel that most people have a good mid to lower chest. It's always the upper chest that seems to be lacking. Now I don't know the biomechanics the way you do, so I just assumed that I did a very low incline pressing movement. I would do dumbbells, I would do benching that way, and I just did nothing flat.
I did 6 months of incline presses, and my chest and my upper chest was worse than ever before.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, so most people don't do that kind of clear, study where it's only this for 6 months and only that for 6 months.
Right.
From an evolutionary standpoint, and I know you like evolution, right? We were once upon a time quadrupeds.
Sure.
As we became primates, we became more and more upright, and our arms pushed progressively in downward directions. But our arms never pushed in upward directions. Ever.
True.
It was never. One of my endorsers is an evolutionary biologist, and we've agreed. There was never a need for an Australopithecine or a Neanderthal or any kind of hominid to ever use his arms, his pectorals, his shoulder joint in what would be considered an incline angle.
Right.
Therefore, the skeleton nor the musculature ever evolved to accommodate that movement because there was no need for that movement. Right. So it just doesn't make any sense that you would now move your arms in an inclined direction, even though we never evolved to do it.
Right, but I mean, you could artificially do that just to overdevelop. I don't think we were meant to have overdeveloped upper pecs, but for bodybuilding purposes, it looks good. So by doing that movement, it might not be a natural movement, but it might create the desired outcome that you want, which is a freakishly developed upper pec muscle.
Well, that sounds good, and wishful thinking is wonderful, but the fact is, again, muscles only pull toward their origin.
Yeah.
Right. So there would have to be an origin in the region of where that upper arm is headed to.
Right, but don't you think that if you overload a certain area of the pec muscle, even though you're not getting a good advantage, because you're not really moving in the right plane of motion, you still might be overstimulating one set of pec fibers over the lower ones?
Right. I hear what you're saying, but the part that your question is forgetting about is that there are no fibers there with which to pull. That direction of pull cannot be accommodated by any muscle of the chest.
So how do you target upper pec fibers? We know that there's a pectoralis, major, upper pectoralis major and a lower pectoralis major muscle.
Well, what there is upper sternal fibers.
Yes.
And clavicular fibers.
Right. So how do you stimulate those preferentially?
Right, well, again, so if you're doing a flat press, in my book, there's a picture of a really, really ripped woman doing flat dumbbell press. And you can see that her once the arm is up, the clavicle shifts from this position to this position, right? And then you can see that the upper arm is moving right toward the origins of the clavicular fibers, as well as the upper sternal fibers.
So you're saying keep elbows out to the side?
Well, anytime that you're doing a chest exercise, you should always allow the limb to move away from the origins and toward the origins. So if you're doing a dip and you're doing this kind of movement, you're not moving away from the sternum nor from the origins, right? You need to move the arm to the side and toward the midline in order to be moving in the direction of the muscle fibers.
And they always tell you not to do that. The powerlifters always keep their arms tucked in. You never hear. I always did for bodybuilding moves, always kept my elbows out to the side and felt that I got maximum stimulation that way. But a lot of people say, oh, you can injure yourself more that way.
Well, look, here's the thing is at all times, in all parts of the anatomy and exercises, you always have to ask yourself, is my limb, which is where the insertion of the muscle is, moving toward the origin of my target muscle, yes or no?
Yeah.
Right? So when you're doing a front press, you're moving toward the clavicle, which is where the front deltoid and the clavicular pectoral are. So any kind of front press or something like this will target clavicular pectoral more, will target front deltoid more because you're moving toward those origins.
Gotcha.
Anytime you're doing this, you're moving toward the sternum and you're moving toward the sternal fibers. And you go in decline direction, you're moving toward the costal fibers as well as some of the sternal fibers.
So why do powerlifters tend to have a more tucked in elbow approach? Are we stronger that way?
What they're doing actually is shortening their lever length.
Oh, okay.
Right? They're bringing this thing and they're creating a very short lever and they're doing this. And so instead of doing this, which creates more moment arm, which is the physics term, the longer the moment arm, the more magnification. They're trying to minimize the magnification.
Gotcha.
So when someone says, if you use this particular method, it'll make you stronger. Well, no. Muscle capacity is muscle capacity. You have the strength you have, right? Yeah. What you can do is you can change your physics by shortening your levers and making your levers be more vertical to get a lesser percentage of the load. But that's like using a crowbar to lift a heavy rock and thinking that you're stronger because you're using a crowbar, or thinking that you're developing more muscle because the rock you're lifting with the crowbar is heavier than it would be if you lifted a rock that was half that size, half that weight without the crowbar.
Gotcha. You
could actually work harder lifting that rock without the crowbar, get more muscle stimulation with a rock that's half the weight than you could with using some physics that allows you to use a heavier weight.
Makes sense.
Let me go quickly back to the bench press. The bench press doesn't do what the dumbbell press. The dumbbell press pulls the upper arm, the humerus, toward the midline of the body.
Yeah.
When you're bench pressing, it can't do that as well because your hands are wide and they're stuck on the bar. So now what you're doing is actually pushing at an angle. That's why your triceps get engaged. If you put oil on that bar, your hands would slide out of the bar, proving that you're engaging your triceps, right? Yeah. You can't actually pull toward the midline, and that's why it's less effective for the pecs than an exercise that allows you to literally pull that arm toward the midline of the body. So you can use more weight, but it's kind of an illusion. Just because using more weight doesn't mean the pecs are working hard.
Right. Since we've had this whole COVID thing, I've been training at home all the time. I mean, I have a cable crossover machine and I have dumbbells, and that's all I'm doing. And I'm doing cable crossovers, and I'm doing dumbbell presses, and my pecs feel like I get a pretty damn good workout. So it makes sense what you're saying. So
Well, the cable crossover is, you're talking about the traditional one with the pulleys that are about 8 feet apart.
No, I don't have a big one. Mine are a little closer together because it's a home unit.
Well, that makes a big difference because when they're really far apart, what you're doing is you have too little resistance here and then too much resistance in the center.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with
that. If they're closer behind you, then you have more at the beginning and less at the end, and that gives you the resistance curve that matches the strength curve.
Yeah, it's almost like a dumbbell press.
Like a dumbbell press, right?
All right, let me ask you here, because this is always another miss or something that people don't get right. when they want to build a wide back, Doug, everyone says wide pull downs. Now, if you talk to Dorian Yates is always a believer of the closer to your body you are, the stronger you are, the bigger you're going to build a back. Which is it?
Well, again, when someone says the closer your grip, the stronger you are, you don't get stronger, right? Just because you change your grip, you're changing the mechanics of the exercise, right, which might allow you to lift more weight. But anytime that something allows us to lift more weight, we should be suspect of it. We shouldn't cling to it and embrace it. We should go, oh, I'm obviously changing my physics to reduce the magnification. Reduction of magnification allows me to use more weight, but that doesn't mean I'm loading the muscle anymore.
Okay, so which is better?
So here's the thing is, when you're doing a lat exercise, you have to, actually any exercise, the first thing you do is you say, where's the origin of the muscle? Where's the insertion of the muscle? And what constitutes full range of motion? Okay, so with the lat, when your arm is extended like this, you got a lat that's fully extended. Your origins are in the bottom 2/3 of your spine and on the top edge of your pelvis.
Right.
The back of your pelvis, right? So what you want to do is you want to pull, again, toward the origin of the lats, right? In a downward, inward direction, right? So if you're doing one arm cable, then you start here and you end up with your elbow all the way at your side, which allows you to get full contraction of the lats.
Right.
Okay, but when you're doing a close grip pull down or a close grip chin up, you're starting too high. You're not starting here. You're starting too high, which means you're already sort of pinching the shoulder joint, getting a little bit of a impingement syndrome happening, right? And then keep in mind that the lat is pulling on the humerus, which is connected right about there, right? So when a muscle pulls on its lever, on its limb, parallel to that limb, that's called a mechanical disadvantage. That means that that muscle has to pull in a direction not of the direction that limb can move.
Interesting.
Right? The limb has to move in that direction, not in that direction. And yet that's the only angle from which it can pull. So you're starting from a mechanical disadvantage, right? And then when you get to the bottom, you can tuck your arm in, but you started with a huge disadvantage at the beginning. If you start with a wide grip and you go like this, you end up here somewhere. So you've lost some range of motion at the end. That's why, and again, because of just like on the deltoids, when you're doing lats, that lat is pulling that way and that one is pulling this way. These are opposite directions. That's why it would be better to work one lat at a time.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah, one arm, a cable, just grab a cable overhead and pull it down, huh?
Right, but at an angle. You don't want it to be straight overhead.
Gotcha.
You want it to be. You want the movement to be parallel to the muscle fibers.
I'm going to try that. I'm doing that tonight.
Right, and you want to avoid the mechanical disadvantage that happens at the beginning, right? And then you want to get a full range of motion. You want to end with that upper arm bone getting right up against the side of your torso.
I'm doing it tonight. That's
and by
my
the
first
way,
exercise.
it should not be straight to the side.
Right.
And the reason for that is because if I get in this position right here, there's no shoulder joint problem. But if I pull my arm down, you'll notice that you have a certain amount of ability to externally rotate this arm. Right. And that's about as far as you can actually take it.
Sure.
So the idea that you can tuck your elbow into your side and at the same time have your hand next to your side, that would constitute a dramatic excessive external rotation of that shoulder joint. So what you should do is you should start with that cable at about maybe a 45, 30 degree angle, not quite more towards the front, but not quite to the side, right about there.
Right.
And as you pull in, you actually rotate your torso slightly toward the weight.
Interesting. Okay.
And then you rotate away from it and then toward it and then away from it and then toward it. And that gives you your full range of motion without externally straining the shoulder joint.
I'll do that. You know, it's interesting you say that because I do that one arm at a time with the low cable. I do like a one arm cable row, like almost like you do a one arm dumbbell row, but I do it with the same thing where I turn my body in and then I kind of pull back, you know, with it. And I feel a real great range of motion. I really feel the lat contract a lot too that way.
And that's one of the reasons why it's better to do one arm lat pull in than it is to do a two arm pull down, because you can't rotate to both sides at the same time.
Interesting. Okay.
And the other thing too is you also find that you lean into, you rotate and you lean your torso in that direction.
Yeah.
And you can't lean your torso in both directions at the same time.
It locks you in too much. I'm going to ask you one more question. We got to do a part two of this another time because I got so many questions to ask you. People are going to love this. Calves. We have people, obviously we know calves are a genetic muscle group. Some people just have big calves, some people don't.
Right.
But I had weak calves, very high calves, and I really worked and got my calves to improve quite a bit and bring them up to balance with my upper body when I was competing, up to par with my upper leg. What would you say is the most effective calf exercises and set numbers of reps and how to execute them?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that you cannot change a high calf. Right. You cannot make the tendon shorter and the muscle longer.
Exactly.
I mean, the shape of our calf is the tendon length is set by genetics, and the muscle length is set by genetics, right? And you can make it bigger, and making it bigger sometimes might make it look fuller.
Yes.
But you cannot actually do anything exercise-wise to make the tendon shorter and the muscle longer. That's number one. Number two is that, when someone asks me what's the best exercise for, I usually start off by saying, well, what would be ideal for the calf, right? Let's reverse engineer it, right? What is best for the calf, for the most part, is a relatively straight knee, right?
Okay.
A bent knee, like a seated calf machine, right? Creates what's called active insufficiency. Active insufficiency happens in the case where a muscle crosses two joints, like the bicep, like the hamstring, like the calf. So when that secondary joint is bent, it brings the origin of that muscle closer to the insertion of that muscle, which shortens the muscle. And that's why when we do, let's say a spider curl, right? We feel the bicep cramping, right? When we do a standing calf or remember back in the day when we did flat leg curls? There was no hump in the thing. We would feel our hamstring cramping. And so you would raise your tailbone up to prevent the cramping. Well, you're actually relieving active insufficiency. When you're doing calves, what you want is more length. So if you have your origin on your humerus, if this is your knee, your origin of the calf is here, right? And your calf is down here. By straightening the knee, you elongate that calf.
So standing calf raises are better, you're saying, than seated?
Well, what I'm saying is standing, leg press, any kind of calf extension where your knee is allowed to be mostly straight.
Now, what we hear this like, if your leg is at a right angle, you work more of the soleus muscle. If you're standing upright, you work more of the gastroc muscle.
Okay, that's a good question. Here's the answer to that. First of all, is that it's a presumption, right? That if the gastrocnemius can't work as hard, then automatically the soleus will take over, and that's not necessarily true. And then the other assumption is that the soleus has much capacity for growth. It does not. The soleus is basically a sheet of muscle. Right? And so they've done studies on this, and what they found was that the soleus works more when the demand is low. Either the demand for speed or the demand for force is low. When you're standing, walking,
it's an endurance muscle.
The soleus works more. When the demand is higher, either for speed or for power, the gastroc works more. Right? So you can never get the soleus to grow enough to compensate for, any thirst. The bulk of the calf is always going to be the gastrocnemius.
So standing, anything with the leg extended in a straight motion is the way to go.
Right. Now, it could be leg press. It could be standing.
Donkey calves.
If you do leg press, of course, you don't have to put a bunch of weight on your spine. That's an advantage. But what I was going to say was foot position does not matter.
Right.
This thing where you turn your toes in, toes out, it doesn't take much observation and thought to see if some guy's turning his toes in, he's rotating his femurs at the hip. Right? It's not like your lower leg is staying put and then your foot by itself is moving. Right? The mechanics of the ankle doesn't change when you rotate the entire leg.
No, that makes sense.
But by the way, you don't want to have a perfectly locked leg when you're going heavy either.
Sure.
Because that strains the knee. And if you have a tendency to hyperextend the knee, that could be super bad, right? So you want to have a little tiny bend in your knee always when you're doing calves.
What I do at home, because I don't, this is relevant because a lot of people have no gyms. I take the that like little leg cuff where you can kind of do your in or out of thigh type stuff, adductor movements, and I actually put it around I pull it up over my calves, and I do standing calf raises with that thing, where I actually lean back against that pad, and I seem to get some stimulation in my calves that way.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
All right, that's an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it's hard to do calves at home if you don't have a leg press machine or something like that.
Yeah, we're making do, and what we have a double adjustable pulley, a free motion machine. We have dumbbells from 2.5 up to 65.
Yeah.
We've got a decline bench adjust to almost flat, and then more, and a seat with a seat back in that. So we're getting a glute machine, a hip extension machine, and then I think we'll be complete. We can work our quads fine by doing those 60 squats on the cables.
Sure.
We can work our hamstrings fine by putting the ankle cuff on the ankle and doing leg curls with the cable.
Okay.
What we can't do very well is a hip extension. Glute bridges are just literally less than half the range of motion that the glutes have capacity for.
So what do you do with hamstring wise there?
What we do is we just connect the ankle thing here,
right,
and then we just do a single leg curl with the cable set up, kind of high.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then we're building a bench, a seat that allows your lower legs, your tibia, to hang without the feet touching the ground.
Oh, okay. All right.
And that way you can do your leg curl and not have your ankle hit the ground.
Right. But I never even thought of doing it the other way. That's cool. I got to try doing that because that's the only thing I've been having trouble training is my hamstrings at home.
Yeah, and well, as you were getting to the calves, we just do standing calf raises with body weight.
Okay.
If you want to add weight, you can always, use cables or hold a dumbbell or something like that. It's awkward because it's not as convenient as a leg press machine.
I'm telling you, put that cuff around your both calves. You can do it, or you can do one at a time. But both calves are good because it kind of just barely fits in there, and it holds pressure against them, and you can do standing calf raises with that.
If you do one-legged calf raises, you've doubled the weight, right?
I know. It's very hard to balance too. Yeah. Hey, Doug,
hold on to something.
This was a great interview. People are going to love this. And you know what? We only covered the one book that you wrote, The Physics of Resistance Exercise. I want to go over one of the old books that you had written about 4 years ago, $1 Million Muscle, because it dealt with exercise myths, and I really want to go over that. So I want to get you back here if you'd agree to come back.
I think I'd be happy to come back.
This is awesome. I know I got to try to catch up to Rick Drayson, our good friend. May he rest in peace, because you were on there over, I think, 30 times on his podcast, right?
Right. Now I'm hoping that I can take it over.
Yeah.
I'd like to continue Rick's Corner.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, that would be awesome.
I'd like to, you need to get permission from his kids, and we don't know what that's going to entail. Yeah. But I think I can do Rick's Corner, and I can have all kinds of guests come on there.
You're good.
The Golden Era guys.
I want to get back. I want to talk more about the training because we don't really go over training as much, I think, as people like. So this is going to be a great interview. People want to get in touch with you. They can go to DougBrignole.com. SmartTraining365.com is your personal training course. And then you got HealthyLearning.com as well. Doug, thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to have you back either next week or the week after.
Thanks, Dave. Good talking to you.
All right, guys. That's going to take us to the end of another episode of Live With. I'm Dave Palumbo with Doug Brignole. See you next time.